everyone. Thanks for joining us in our conversation on the Agents panel at the Mayborn Conference. I always enjoy being part of this when I can. I'm John Parsley, Editor-in-Chief at Dutton and Plume within Penguin Random House. And I've had occasion to be in contact with each of the wonderful agents we have on our panel today, and I look forward to learning probably as much as you about their work during the pandemic and what they're excited about, some tips for approaching an agent and developing your career in book writing. So I think we're going to get to it with just kind of brief self-introductions, and then I'm going to ask a few questions that are on my mind, and we can chat about that and discuss. So on my screen, Aisha is on the top left, so I'm going to start there with Aisha Pandey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really very excited to be a part of this panel. My name is Aisha Pandey. I have an agency, Aisha Pandey Literary, that I launched about 15 years ago. And before that, I was an editor at Crown Publishers, HarperCollins, and most recently, Farrar, Straus and Giroux. My agency exploded just this year from a very small boutique agency into something else, which I don't know what it exactly is, because it's all happening right in this very moment, because we are very lucky to represent Ibram X. Kendi, who has become one of the premier thought leaders in the field of anti-racism. But other than that, we also represent literary fiction, some YA, and graphic novels under the helm of Anjali Singh, who is also a former editor and was the editor for Persepolis. And and nonfiction, scholarly and journalist nonfiction. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thank you. Jenny Herrera.
Hi, again, it is a pleasure to be here and to, eventually see you all for the Q&A. I am a literary agent at the David Black Agency. I actually got my start working on books in translation at Europa Editions. And so I still have a deep fondness for those sorts of stories well told. And my background is actually in academia. So I studied philosophy for a long time, and I studied the social sciences. So I have a deep interest in anything that has that idea base to it. Whether it be something about cognitive science or economics. And then when it comes to journalism, I'm always looking for ideas that speak to bigger issues or things that can, speak to the human condition. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you all.
Thanks, and hi, Leticia.
Hi, John. How are you doing? First of all, I want to make a correction about what Neil said. He said you're an editor. In my eyes, you're a publishing god. Okay.
Oh my gosh. We'll take the next 50 minutes to distinguish that idea.
But my name is Leticia Gomez. I'm based in Houston, Texas, which kind of makes me a geographically challenged agent. But that was before the pandemic. Like Aisha, I started my agency 15 years ago. In 2007, right when we were having the worst recession, one of the worst recessions. So I don't know what I was thinking at that time, but I started my agency because I wanted to help bring cultural voices to the forefront. Because I am bilingual, I felt like this country did not have enough bilingual literary agents that could offer representation both in English and Spanish. So that's always been the main focus of my agency, is to represent those authors that have a very difficult time finding representation, and they often come from the minority pool. But then I've kind of evolved, so I would say right now my list is 50% mainstream and 50% minority authors. And I really love that combination a lot. I come from a newspaper background. I started in the publishing business in the early 90s when I decided to launch a bilingual newspaper in my hometown, which was something that hadn't been done in a town that had a population of 60% Hispanic. There was no news outlet highlighting the achievements of the Hispanic community. So I took it upon myself. I felt like I had to do something about it. Lately, my agency has been really successful in bringing those cultural voices to the forefront. I specialize mostly in nonfiction. That's where I sell the most. I sell a lot of self-help books in every genre. I also specialize in memoir and narrative nonfiction. The reason I've gravitated towards memoir and narrative nonfiction is because I've also become a film and television agent in the interim. And those are the properties that Hollywood is looking for: narrative nonfiction and true stories. So, that's why I focus on that right now. But anything nonfiction, and I'm also looking forward to doing some more fiction like I used to in the beginning.
Leticia, before we started the recording, Neil was talking a little bit about the pandemic, the challenges that we've faced in publishing, and the idea that there's been sort of some changes as far as books being scheduled and other effects on the industry. Certainly from the publishing side, as an editor, I've been going through that. That ranges from authors who are unable to complete some of the reporting that they had planned if they had to travel, to the fact that we have not seen our colleagues in person since March, and trying to navigate not just the technology, but how you conduct a business when being close and collegial and collaborating a lot is very important. How have you been able, what have the challenges been for you? How has your business been and yourself over the course of these months?
Okay. Well, it's going to be surprising for you to hear this, but actually, I've had a very, very successful year, especially during the pandemic months. Because I think it's the mindset that you start with. I just kept going as if nothing is wrong. That's how I operated. Like, publishing is going to go on. Publishing is not going to go quietly in the night. So I need to work as if things are normal, and just adjust to what the publisher's going through. Some of the publishers that I work with a lot, well, of course, they shut down, their physical office during the pandemic. Some of them, laid off a lot of their people, a lot of the editors that I had established relationships with. Some of them froze acquisitions, right? So I just kind of had to, be informed about who's having what problems, and then kind of maneuver the way I work around that. And also still continuing to work with a sense of urgency. But I think that, some of the publishers have had a lot of challenges, but I think they got knocked down for a little while, but I think most of them are getting back up again, into the swing of things. So like I said, I've been also just submitting projects that are timely right now. In the last 4 months, I've made some really good sales. But what I have noticed is that I think with all the social unrest we're having, a lot of publishers are now more open-minded than ever to seeing and acquiring cultural voices. So I'm pounding on that like a jungle cat and going with that.
Jenny, does a lot of that sound familiar to you? How has your experience of the pandemic been? How's your daily routine changed in work for home?
Yeah, I mean, I think for an agent, a lot of your routine is very similar to what it was, in advance of the pandemic, simply because, I have colleagues, but it's not as though we work closely together on projects. It's, you're very siloed as an agent. And then in terms of the books that I sell, I think the toughest thing for me right now is figuring out what ideas are going to resonate with people 2 years from now. right? Because after a book is sold, it's typically a year until it delivers and then a year until it publishes. And so I'm thinking about the world as it exists right now, where it feels like we're in a chaotic system that could go in a lot of different directions, and anticipating what the market, like what consumers are going to want to read in 2 years. I think that's the biggest dilemma that I'm feeling right now. And so my only ballast in this is to simply focus on the ideas that I think are evergreen, and the ideas that I think that I'm going to want to read that book 10 years from now. I'm going to want to read that book 20 years from now. This is a book that I'm going to want to give a college student just as much as I'm going to want to give it to my grandmother. And if I can focus on those books and those big ideas, then I feel like I can give the world time to unravel so that I understand a little bit more about what the future looks like.
Aisha, do you feel that has to do with some percentage of the quality of the writing and some percentage of what the idea is, or does the balance go very far in one direction or another? How do you anticipate what the future's readers want?
Well, I feel very much the way that Jenny does. I feel like it doesn't behoove us right now to try and predict, what things are going to look like, or what the trends will be, or what readers will want to read in 2 years. The world is just changing too quickly. So I think that we have to really, really think about the fundamentals of, what makes a book valuable, what makes it valuable now, and what will make it valuable 10 years from now. Inevitably, if a book is somehow in some way dealing with the current moment, then things will, as history moves on, it may become more or less relevant. But, by focusing in on, is the research, thorough? Is the writing excellent? And have the ideas, do the ideas feel distinctive and original? Then I think you're more likely to come up with a book that will stand the test of time.
I think that's I've been thinking along those lines as well, and I have a kind of a bar that's hard to jump, but I am intrigued by authors who are the only author who could tell a book, tell the story of a book, and that may be because it is a personal narrative or a memoir. It may be because they have dug and dug into a story, and they are the person who knows as much as anyone about it. But if there's a way to understand that you're interacting with somebody who has really absorbed not just the facts of the story, but the context of it, that is always really appealing to me. Aisha, is there a way when a potential client approaches you that helps signal those things? If that takes a while to get through in a letter or an email, what are the things you like to see kind of up top, or the things that turn your head amidst all the approaches that you would receive?
Well, I think that I'm turned on by ideas, and ideas well told and thoroughly developed, and ideas that feel fresh and new to me. And also, sort of building on what you were saying, John, a sense that, this story has been told, but not from this particular perspective, or not in this entirely new way. And a lot of our clients tend to come from, underrepresented communities. And I'm kind of obsessed, as a former history major, I'm kind of obsessed with telling histories, not from the perspective of the victors, for example, but from the colonized, from the defeated, from the voices that have been silenced or made invisible, and forcing people to like think about a history that they thought that they knew from in an entirely new way, because I feel like the histories, those histories have not in fact always been told in a certain way, or chunks have been left out, as we're discovering about American history now and the history of enslavement and things like that. So I find that, and also an author who has that sensibility and that awareness, that they know they're very familiar with that history, and they can tell it, and they understand why it's distinctive and fresh and new. In the nonfiction world, that's really appealing to me. The other element that I often look for is if an author can bring a strong personal element to bear, that in some way their experience makes them, more sensitive to the story that they're telling, or where they can even interweave, a personal experience or element into that larger story.
Speaking of Dr. Kendi's most recent book, I feel that is such a well-balanced approach in terms of thought, evaluation, and context, as well as personal experience. And I look for that too. I find that that balance challenging for a lot of writers. Jenny, do you find yourself drawn toward that kind of project? And when you're getting materials in for the first time from a new client, how much work do you do on the on what ends up going to the editor ultimately on that proposal? What kinds of things do you tend to find yourself doing? What kind of advice are you offering, and how much work gets done at that stage?
I think for me, one of the really appealing things that I look for, especially in a query, is the person's expertise. And again, like Aisha said, if they have a personal element involved in the story, right? Because we know that objective journalism doesn't work. Like, nobody's objective. Objective is just code for a certain perspective that has been lionized. And so the idea is, I want to know why you're telling this story. And what typically happens is that once I see a person's expertise, then I see that they can write, then a lot of times I work with them together on developing an idea that I think is really saleable. And an idea, because I read all the time. I know all of us read all of the time. And so we're very aware of what the market is for books, right? We're very aware what ideas are already in existence. And so the really exciting thing for me is to work with an author on finding the exact right idea that fits their experiences and their expertise. And then to help build that out. And so oftentimes I feel very much like a midwife in the beginning, where I'm not doing any of the work, but I'm just sort of guiding them. And really coming up with the idea that I think that, I know where that fits on the shelf. And that has happened really frequently, actually, where I'll get a query in, and it'll be someone with amazing writing skills and amazing expertise, amazing personal story, but a bad idea, or an idea that I don't feel like I could sell. And so we'll work together to find a better idea. And with that, I've had a lot of success.
Leticia, when you're looking at proposals, do you find yourself surprised when something doesn't sell or when something does? How confident are you in that conversation when you're going out on a submission? Mm-hmm. In what the ultimate result might be? I know a lot of times an author's question on the publishing side, for example, might be, after a couple of weeks of sales, is that good? Is that number of sales of that book good? Mm-hmm. And it's very hard to explain that. I would always say, I will always want more. I always think we could sell more of that book. That's why we signed it up in the first place. Like, I believe in that book. But there's a lot of factors on every given week as far as what a book sells. So there's something to kind of work through and explain there. Right. As far as what it's like to be represented, to be, said, yes, we're going to have this relationship, this agent and the author. What are the expectations you try to set as you're going through that submission process?
Right. Well, the first thing I tell them is that this business can be very unpredictable. It is. And what gets me, I'm very careful about what I choose to take on, just because, I only have 24 hours in a day. But for me, for an author to really just grab my heart to the point that I'm going to champion this book or die, is the story has to first and foremost reach me. After I read the proposal or the story, I have to feel like I'm a better person afterward for having read this. And if it evokes that kind of emotion in me, chances are that I'm going to be able to find a publisher for the work. I like projects in narrative nonfiction and in memoir that teach the reader something that they never ever heard before, that that evoke emotions in them, that gets their mind off of their troubles for the time that they're reading the book, that give them hope. And for nonfiction projects, it's the same thing, like business self-help. Is this just fluff and stuff, or does this really provide really practical advice that, if the reader applies it, will actually make that person a better life? So I'm looking for projects that is going to make a person, their life better, and change them in a way for the better. And then also it has to be, the writing has to be exquisite. It has to be the best that it can be. I've always, because we deal in nonfiction more, it's the author platform is very important, because at the end of the day, this is a business, and publishers do look at, when they're reading, they're also reading with the dollar signs in their eyes, especially sales and marketing people. So I think that you need two things in order to get a book deal. You need a unique story that's never been told before. The execution of it is exquisite writing, and you need the author to have a good platform. One without the other is just not going to work. So that's what I try to look for. And if it were my world, if I control the whole publishing industry, I would get rid of the author platform, okay, and just worry about the story itself. But unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of doing that. So I have to kind of, yes, I've had to pass on great stories because the author platform is not big enough. And sometimes I just say, the heck with it. I'm going to go with this project, even though the author does not have a strong platform, in the hope that the editor is going to be touched in the same way that I was by the book.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's worth, in past panels, the idea of a platform, what it really is, what does it matter or not, has come up in the question. So it might be worth talking about that a little bit. If we want to go back through Jenny, what are the things what does that collect, that phrase? It's a catch-all for any number and maybe an infinite number of things. But what does it mean to you? Is it something that you can work on? Is it something that you can improve? Is it something that is a focus for you when you're thinking about representing someone?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think there are a few ways of thinking about what a platform is. On the one hand, you have, the social media presence. You have, are you a writer for the New Yorker? Do you have an audience who is ready and willing to buy your book as soon as it's published, no matter what it is? And then the other way of thinking about a platform is your expertise. And that tends to be the one that I focus on the most, because I have an academic background. I think in terms of ideas, and I worry about chasing things that are ephemeral, right? Someone's social media presence, I don't think, is very meaningful to me. And so it's not something that turns my head, I think probably to my detriment. But in terms of, I understand a lot of the people at this conference are journalists. What is your platform? Well, your platform is going to be, what publications you've published in. It's going to be what other journalists who'd be willing to support your book, things like that. And so I think that when we talk about platform, a natural inclination is for someone to say, oh shit, I need to get on Twitter. And I don't necessarily think that that's the solution. I think, build your expertise. If you are a sociologist, really, really make sure that you're understanding the thing that you're studying. If you're a historian, make sure that you have those credentials to back that up. And I think that ultimately for the sorts of books that I work on, that matters more than those outward facing things.
Would you agree with that, Aisha? Do you think platform is something you need to spend time buffing up with authors or giving advice about, or do you kind of look at it at an early stage and say it is about expertise and reputation and credibility, and there's a lot of different ways to have that?
Well, I completely agree with Jenny that it is, it's almost like chasing something ephemeral, and, the idea of having, thousands of Twitter followers, it doesn't necessarily feel like that adds value. But I think we also have to be pragmatic and understand that there has been a shift in the publishing industry, and that authors are expected to participate in the promotion of their own book. And so we have to be realistic and have that conversation early on with either aspiring clients or clients that we already have taken on. So in other words, like, I don't take on a client because they have a platform. But once I've taken them on, I will definitely have that conversation with them about what can we do and what would that look like with your particular project. And that may be that you start thinking about writing a series of articles, or, starting, on some speaking engagements, at universities, or doing some networking and outreach, in your specific community of scholars, that can maybe lead to invitations or fellowships or things like that. So, in other words, let's look at your expertise. Let's look at all the networks that you already have in place, and let's see how we can hone those, to the best of the ability. But I'm not going to ask you to now all of a sudden get on Twitter and tweet like you never have before.
Yeah.
Would anybody like to tackle what can be a tricky question, which is to talk a little bit about numbers, a sense of the kind of volume of approaches you receive, and the time it takes you to process that and really think about who you'd like to be in touch with. I know on the editorial side, it's a significant volume, and a knock on established editors can be that they're really just being they're receiving submissions and evaluating. They're not necessarily going out and looking for new authors. They're relying on agents, and it's all they can do to keep up with their inbox. I think there's a lot more nuance to it than that, but I think people who are watching this panel might be curious, like, am I one of thousands? What is the actual likelihood of going through this process and being seen? Being acknowledged, getting a phone call. And I know that's maybe a tough question, and it changes with time, and this has been a very busy year, I think, as far as acquisitions in the trade book publishing industry in general. But I'm curious if anyone has thoughts about of that moment. If a writer and someone who's really wants to write a book and has an interesting idea and thinks it stands out, wants to reach out to one of you, how hopeful should they be?
I'll go ahead and tackle it first. I get, several new submissions a day, but most of my business comes from referrals from my clients. That alone keeps me really busy. And because of that relationship that I have, I always look at referrals first. And then the blind submissions that come in. But I try as hard as I can to acknowledge everyone that contacts me in one way or another. Sometimes I can get lost in it, and before I know it, half the day is gone, just, letting people know, look, this is a courtesy email. I got your submission. I'm going to take a look at it as soon as I can, but just please be advised that I'm extremely busy, and your patience and understanding during the review process will be greatly appreciated. I usually try to send one of those out between the first 24 to 48 hours, because before I was an agent, I was a writer sending out queries. So I know how that feels. You know, it's writers can be very sensitive from the aspiring beginning one to the veteran one. So acknowledging their existence, you know, that yes, I got your work, I think goes a long way, even if you don't end up with the person, because they're constantly facing rejection, rejection, rejection. And I just believe that writers, they have a lot of it. I understand the process that it took them to get to the point where they're querying you, and I respect that, and it should be honored by at least acknowledging them and their submission, even if it's a quick email.
Does that sound typical for you, Aisha?
Yes, we do read everything that comes in, but it definitely helps if you've done your research and you are, you know, very considered about why you are approaching, you know, our particular agency. I feel like there's a lot of information about, you know, what the agency is, what each of us is particularly interested in. And I think that we, you know, I personally have really deeply considered, you know, what I am best at agenting, you know, and so I feel like it has to be sort of a mutual understanding. And so what I think what gets my attention, you know, especially in the unsolicited space, is somebody who is as deeply considered about, you know, the business aspect of their writing as I am about, you know, considering them, you know, as possible candidates for representation. You know, we are not, you know, we are very distinctive as an agency and in terms of the kinds of things that we want to champion. And so you have to really, you know, be willing to make a case for yourself. But if you do, then I will take that very seriously.
That was a really good answer.
It was. It really was. It hits on a really important point, I think. I have started to recognize this as well. The idea that there is a relationship there and a dynamic that, if it's working, can help push that book along, that project, and that ranges from from editorial support and being an ear, to giving tough advice when it's needed, and all the way through. And like you said, that might be a process that takes many years. Do you feel, Jenny, when you're working with a new client or an old client, that you're looking ahead in that way for them, that you're looking for writers who are authors who are going to be doing more than one project? Or do you focus kind of on that one thing that they're sending in and then see what happens?
I think it's both. I mean, I think you have to be like all in on the project that you're working on in that moment, right? To feel like this is the book that's going to break them out. And you have to be able to make the case for that investment. But, you know, I spend so much time working with authors and developing relationships with them. It would be a real bummer if we only worked on one book together. And so the hope is that you're able to, you know, start with that one book and then build it into a career. I would love for every author I work with to be able to quit their job and to be a writer full time. I think that's the dream for a lot of people. You know, the truth is it's probably not going to happen with one book. May not even happen with two books, but you know, if you're able to keep selling books for them, you get them closer to having that dream become a reality. And so, you know, it's both. I have to be fully invested in that one book, but I also have to think about what their career is going to look like in the long term.
When you're hearing from someone and you're intrigued by their pitch, usually they're sending an email, sending maybe a sample chapter or something like that. Do you prefer that to be exclusively sent to you? Do you expect that 10 other agents have it as well? What are the kind of etiquette around submitting it projects to a bunch of agents and seeing what happens versus choosing one and starting there?
I think it would be really it would really be really tough as a writer if you only sent to one agent. I think we can be slow. We can, things can get lost in the shuffle. There are lots of reasons why an agent won't respond right away. Sometimes it's just, we have 4 things out on submission, and so we can't. You either just don't have the bandwidth. And so it would be a shame if you pinned all of your source of hopes on one agent at a time. And I don't expect that. I expect potential authors to be querying lots of people. And in fact, I think that's best for everybody, right? Because it forces me to be on my A game, to, if I'm interested, to convince you why I'm the best agent for you. And as a writer, that's what you want. You want somebody who's going to fight to get to represent you.
Does it happen occasionally that you have to make a case for yourself? Presumably it's a sort of self-selecting that an author says, "Oh, I'm going to send this to you, Aisha, or Leticia." Do you have to are there certain questions that you get asked like all the time that might be useful for viewers of this panel to hear you talk about? What are the kind of common things a potential author asks you about the process? Leticia, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, first of all, one of the things that they asked me is, would I be willing to share contact information from some of my other clients for referrals? And I'm always happy to do that. In the beginning, when I first started out, I lost a lot of really possible good clients because I was not based in New York. But that no longer is a problem for me, thankfully. A lot of times I also lost clients because I'm a minority. I'm a woman of color. That's getting better for me. But usually they ask the typical questions, what do you really think of my work? Do you think you can sell it? And I have to, and at the risk of sounding cocky, but because I'm geographically challenged and because I am a Latina agent, I have to let them know how confident I am, not only about their work, but about my ability to sell their work. So I tell them, look, if I can't sell this thing, no other agent can. So I have to really fortify, that I have a very strong belief in my capabilities as an agent, and then I give them the contact information they want for referrals, and usually when they talk to my clients do a great job of selling me as well if they need to go that far.
You make such a good point, and the pandemic actually has only increased the momentum of this, I think, but it really does not matter, I think, where an agent is based, maybe increasingly where an editor is based. I was talking with someone about this the other day, and they said, well, what about all those lunches, those famous lunches?
Right. Well, back in the day, John, you felt like you have arrived as a writer if you have a New York or LA based agent. That was it's a status symbol, versus having an agent in Texas.
Yeah, I looked across in preparation for this conversation, our list, and many of our authors, almost none of our authors are based in New York. Many of our agents that we have acquired books from are not based in New York, and not even necessarily based in this country. So I do think, as far as one of the practical changes that's happened quite quickly and maybe accelerated because of the pandemic is the fact that we actually have more meetings. We have more opportunities to dig in with an author about a book without them having to have the expense and time of coming to New York to do that. And kind of rush around the city for a day or two. The chance to dig in is it's easier. We're doing it as much as we can, much more often, it feels like. Aisha, do you feel like over the since the panel title has to do with the pandemic, over the last 6 months or so, that there is any noticeable difference in the kinds of projects that you're getting, that there are opportunities that that arise for writers of books in this moment? Or do you take a longer view, kind of like the way we started the panel, talking about it's the writing, it's the idea, it's the writer. I can't focus too much on what's happening in the headlines right now.
The biggest opportunity that I've seen is for the writers that I've been representing all along. I mean, I decided very early on, both for personal reasons, you know, as an immigrant and a biracial woman, that the voices that I was most interested in, you know, in reading, but also in representing, because I didn't see enough of those kinds of voices, were from those that in some way grappled with, you know, the notion of being an outsider or being other, and you know how that plays out both in fiction and as well as in nonfiction. And my experience as being both as an editor and as an agent is a lot of, you know, having to knock on doors and a lot of having to convince people that these were valuable and worthy voices. And so the big difference for us has been that the doors have all of a sudden swung open. And, you know, there's this acknowledgement that, yes, indeed, you know, these are voices that we need to be thinking about adding to our list. But in terms of how I'm looking at projects, you know, I'm not looking at them any differently at all, because ultimately it's still all about, you know, the merit of the book. And who knows, you know, is this a trend that will continue? Or, you know, I've been in publishing long enough now to I've seen the imprints come and the imprints go. Remember that we had all of those Black imprints and, you know, Latinx imprints, and they went by the wayside. You know, we had so many African-American writers that were bestsellers back in the 90s, you know, and they've all disappeared. And so now there's this new openness and interest, and it just still remains to be seen how much of that is trend and how much of that is going to be a long-lasting shift. Yeah. And so I think the best thing to do is to just continue to focus on, you know, finding, you know, the very, very best, most worthy voices, you know, that will stand the test of time. We're not reading them because they're Black or because, you know, they're from some marginalized community, but because, you know, this is an amazing book that just deserves to be read.
I think that's for me, that elemental experience of connecting with something, either because it's recognizable or maybe because it isn't, where you still connect in such a way that you are you're moved, you want to talk about it, the book lodges in your mind, and that's not, it isn't that common an experience. I think is it fair to say, Jenny, that experience you have reading is similar to what anyone would have picking up a book at a bookstore, that sometimes you just don't connect, but when you do, that's the person you really want to reach out to and start a relationship with, professional relationship.
Absolutely. And to that, I would just add that it's so precarious, that connection. So there have been books that I have started to read and I thought, wow, I don't know what the big deal is. Everybody's talking about this book and I can't find the thread. And then a year will pass and I'll pick it up again and I'll be floored and I'll finish it, you know, within a day. And I'll wonder how, I was like, who is this person who thought that, you know, there wasn't anything here? And so that, I think, is the only thing that I would add to that, which is that I think the connection is really important. I think that in publishing, especially, you know, from the editorial side and from the agenting side, we all fall in love with books, and that's why we champion it. we champion them, and then, you know, all of the sort of backward logic we get at to explain why we love this particular book is just that. It's backward logic to explain emotions, because the emotional connection is still the thing that matters the most. And that, you know, in terms of the books that I choose to take on, it's often because I feel that deep emotional connection.
I'm getting down to our last couple minutes.
Okay.
Flag. Is there any kind of parting words, Leticia, you would want to offer about this process, and words of encouragement for someone who's looking to find an agent to work with, and ideally for the long haul?
Yeah, I think this is a very, very good time to write because a lot of us have more time on our hands. So if you were procrastinating, if you're a writer who feels like you have a fantastic story to tell, seize the moment right now. If you're at home, you know, if you have extra time, if you're in pain, I think some of the best works are born when a writer is in deep pain. I've always been, I believe in the concept of the tortured soul. Some of the most tortured souls in history were some of the most creative people you've ever heard of. And so I think now is just seize the moment and write, because there's so much going on, you know, this whole pandemic, all the social unrest, it's bringing out a lot of feelings out of people. And so my advice to writers is don't worry about finding the agent right now. Don't worry about if your book can be if it's published or not. Get your story out of your system and do it now.
That is great advice. Makes me want to pick up a pen now. Thank you.
Well, you have to go back to work.
Yes, as we all do. Jenny, do you have any parting words?
To give people advice and hope and joy.
Or pragmatism and reality and whatever it needs to be.
You know, I think that right now is a time when, you know, at least for me personally, everything feels so up in the air. Like, you know, I keep waiting. What's going to happen with the election? What's going to happen after the election? What is happening with the world and with climate change? And so I think that what authors can really do to be kind to themselves is just to be patient with their work, and to be thoughtful and deliberative, and they'll know it when it's right. And at that point, when they know it and they feel confident about the story that they want to tell and the perspective that they have, then that's the time to submit your work. And, you know, don't be as concerned about the validation, because it never feels as good as you think it will. And, you know, just focus on creating work that is really meaningful to you, and that says something that you would want to be, you know, in a book, something that's not going to be destroyed, something that will last on the shelves until your grandparents or your grandchildren's time, and have that be the focus more than anything else.
Aisha, I don't know, can we top this?
It's very hard to top it, I have to say.
I certainly can agree with it.
So much brilliance coming. I guess I would just add that when you are ready to query agents, then honor all of the hard work that you've put into, you know, writing your project, your proposal, your manuscript, by taking time and being deliberate about whom you are submitting to, and prepare yourself by really asking yourself the tough questions about what you would be looking for in that relationship with an agent, because we all have different strengths, you know, and I might be a great agent for one person, but not for another. And so if you already come into it with some clarity about the things that would be most important to you, I think it could make your process a lot easier. And then just be very selective and don't jump on the first offer of representation that you get.
Great. Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to seeing all of you, and I'm basically confined in this small space, and it's been great chatting. And I know we'll be doing some Q&A, at least some of us, alongside this panel. But for now, thank you so much, and best wishes, and hope all are safe and well.